higher criticism of the New Testament. And let me give you a couple examples here, okay? With our computers today, we have two higher critics, one G.H.C. McGregor and A.Q. Morton, who took the literary style of the books of Romans and Galatians and used these as standards to test the literary style of the other Pauline epistles. Now, when they threw all this information into the computer and then gauged it against these other books that Paul was supposed to write, they came out and said, look, the facts show that Paul did not write this stuff. Okay? Now, the students listening to that kind of stuff say, look, you're just really slick, you're smart, you've made this sound really good, but what about this other information?
Yes, this area of higher criticism is very important, and let's begin with McGregor and Morton to get them off of our field of attention right at the beginning. You heard, I suppose, of the statistician who drowned wading across a river with an average depth of 3 feet. Yes, the statistical analysis of McGregor and Morton is flawed. As you say, they took the literary style of 2 of the books of the New Testament that everyone holds were written by the Apostle Paul, and then they compared the literary style with the literary style of the other so-called Pauline writings and came to the conclusion that these writings were not written by Paul. Well, later on, a couple of wags took the book that McGregor and Morton produced on the subject, fed the literary style of the preface and first chapter into the computer, and demonstrated that 7 different people had written their book. Now, what does this show? It shows that literary style is no adequate demonstration of authorship. And we all recognize this. Our term papers and our love letters are very different in style. Or we have a very bad love life or get very bad grades in school. C.S. Lewis, who was a literary scholar his entire life, C.S. Lewis wrote an essay entitled Biblical Criticism, in which he says that the higher critical assumption that literary style is a proper basis for determining authorship is simply wrong. From a scholarly standpoint, this is not the way to determine authorship. He says people have tried to find the sources of his own writings, such as the Narnian Chronicles, by internal examination of style. He says they have not been right once. And he says they were writing in his own time, in his own language. What gives the higher critics the idea that they can look at documents in a language that is no longer a living language 2,000 years ago, and that on the basis of literary style absolutely establish questions of authorship? And of course, if critics were right that these documents had not actually been written by the people that they're claimed to have been written by, how is it possible that that got by the hostile critics of that same period? The hostile witnesses stand there ready to find any flaw in this stuff, including false authorship. F.F. Bruce of the University of Manchester had an interesting thing to say on this subject. He said, "It was not only friendly eyewitnesses that the early preachers had to reckon with. There were others less well disposed who were also conversant with the main facts of the ministry and death of Jesus. The disciples could not afford to risk inaccuracies, not to speak of willful manipulation of the facts, which would at once be exposed by those who would be only too glad to do so." And certainly they would have exposed instances of people writing under false names.